There are hundreds of thousands of soldiers standing by on the Russian border, and thousands of reservists have been called up for duty. As of recently, Russian troops are advancing on Ukraine's capital from several directions after its leader ordered an invasion. First, airports and military headquarters were destroyed. Then tanks and troops began pouring into Ukrainian cities from Russia and Belarus. Putin declared that Russia could not feel safe, develop and exist because of what he claimed was a constant threat from modern Ukraine. There is no doubt that Russia wants to overthrow Ukraine's democratically elected government. It is unknown what Russia's plans for Ukraine are, but it faces stiff resistance from a deeply hostile population. To understand why Russia attacked Ukraine, let's look at what led to this situation. Russia invaded and seized Crimea in 2014, despite publicly denying this. Russia views the Crimea conflict as a revolutionary movement, led by ethnic Russians seeking reunification with Russia. In reality, the Russian special forces were confirmed to be working with the Crimean rebels. After that, research into Russian social media revealed more damning evidence of regular Russian soldiers operating inside Ukrainian territory. Both unconventional and conventional military forces were used in Crimea to fight off Ukrainian forces, and in the end Crimea declared independence and was quickly absorbed by Russia. Over the past few years, fighting has continued between rebel forces and Ukrainian forces, with Russia supporting them in a less apparent manner. In the present situation, there seems to be a real possibility that Russia will invade Ukraine on a large scale, as 100,000 Russian soldiers mass along the border with Ukraine. Would Russia really invade a bordering nation? Could it actually do so? And how would the world react if it did? Several former Soviet republics have become independent since the end of the Cold War, resulting in a huge loss of territory and economic outflow for Russia. These newly independent nations took advantage of the post-Soviet years to ensure their own survival and independence by establishing closer ties with the West. In spite of Russia's clear opposition to NATO's expansion east of Germany, new states in Eastern Europe joined NATO, expanding NATO forces closer towards Russian territory. As NATO advances further north, its forces will eventually reach within 500 miles of Moscow. This was a strategic failure for Russia, and it summed all the fears of a country with a difficult past. Throughout its history, Russia itself has been repeatedly invaded, and the human and economic toll has been immense each time. Russia is so vulnerable to invasion because it sits at the edge of the European plain, a large area of relatively flat land that is very hard to defend. As military formations have become more modern, this strategic deficit has only intensified, and after World War II, the Soviet Union became obsessed with pushing any potential future aggressor as far as possible. Will Russia invade Ukraine in order to prevent it from joining NATO and advancing further? Here's a comparison between both militaries. Ukraine's military is ranked 22nd out of 154. Despite slowly slipping out of the top spot, Russia remains the world's second strongest power in terms of military strength, and its advantage over Ukraine is vast. In comparison to Ukraine's 200,000 active military troops, Russia has 850,000 active troops. That's a difference of 650,000 in favor of Russia. In the air, Russia trails Ukraine by a wide margin, with the second best air force in the world numbering 4,200. Ukraine, on the other hand, only has 320 aircraft available, of which only 70 are fighter aircrafts, versus a fleet of 770 Russian fighter aircrafts. In addition, Russia has a significant advantage in attack aircrafts, with 740 of them compared to Ukraine's 30. On the land, there are over 12,000 tanks in the Russian land forces, but many experts believe that only 6,000 of these vehicles can be used in immediate combat. As for Ukraine, it has 3,000 tanks, giving Russia a probable 2-to-1 advantage. What message are these numbers trying to convey about a possible Russian invasion? Although there is a clear advantage in numbers on the Russian side, even in the worst-case scenario, Ukraine would not be confronted with the full force of the Russian military. It's because a significant number of these troops are needed elsewhere for security operations. it is still necessary for Russia to maintain a strong defensive posture along its border with NATO. If Russia invaded Ukraine, it would not enjoy the vast majority of superiority that raw data shows. On the other hand, Ukrainians have some confidence in the West that it will not abandon them to Russian aggression, seeing as how Ukraine's re-annexation would be a strategic disaster for NATO. Additionally, Ukrainian military forces have proved themselves to be more capable. At the time of the annexation, the Kremlin was confident that Ukraine's forces would collapse quickly and their ability to resist rebellion movements across east border with Russia would be inadequate on a long-term basis. In spite of this, Ukrainian forces did not collapse as expected, and they managed to withstand the onslaught of battle against Russian forces in Ukraine. However, the separatists have largely been contained, and Ukraine remains united. After being attacked by modern Russian weapon systems, Ukrainian military units have proven surprisingly resilient and capable, resulting in the United States dispatching numerous observers to gather intelligence on Russian capabilities. A whopping $2.5 billion has been provided in military aid to Ukraine by the United States alone, with an additional $200 million provided in December 2021. Most of this aid has come in the form of anti-tank missiles, anti-air missiles, counter-radar systems, small arms, and millions of ammunition. Currently, 90% of Ukraine's aid comes from the United States. It is clear that the type of assistance provided reflects the U.S.'s view of an invasion by Russia. The goal of Ukraine would be to slow the pace of the war as much as possible in hope of an international response, as it could never defeat the Russian military alone. In response to Russian aggression, the world would undoubtedly respond with immediate and highly punishing sanctions, but Russia has proven to be enduring further economic damage from global sanctions. International sanctions have already wreaked havoc on Russia's economy, but further sanctions could only have a limited impact on the country. Due to its substantial energy exports, which European nations depend on heavily, Russia has been able to build up a substantial war chest to help it avoid sanctions. Despite this, U.S. diplomats have indicated that U.S. is prepared to impose even more damaging sanctions on Russia if it invades Ukraine, as well as take unspecified actions. It is unclear exactly what these unspecified actions might consist of, but they could involve direct military intervention against Russia. Taking into account the strategic importance of Ukraine to NATO, it seems increasingly likely that any Russian invasion will be met with a U.S.-led military campaign against Russia. Putin also seems to understand this. Russia faces this threat because, without a swift victory in Ukraine, it cannot compete with the U.S. military in a long conflict. He recently announced that Russia's nuclear arsenal is ready for combat. A major power invades a European neighbor for the first time since World War II, which is terrifying for the people of Ukraine and horrifying for the rest of the continent. There have already been dozens of civilians and soldiers killed in what Germany calls Putin's war, and for Europe's leaders, this invasion has brought some of the darkest hours since the 1940s.